Thank you very much, first of all, to NRC for inviting me to do this. I think it can be a good discussion today. And for those of you that I haven't met in the past, my name is Elisa Obermann. I'm the Executive Director at Renewables Canada, and we are a national industry association focused on wave, tidal, river current, and offshore wind. So all the things we're talking about today. And so today, basically what I wanted to do is provide, first, I just want to start with a little bit of just why we are even looking at marine renewables, where we are, very, very briefly, just to kind of set the scene. And then I'll talk more about kind of my thinking and vision for what we can accomplish in the next 10 years. So just kind of a check here. I think we all probably in this meeting are all very aware of why we're looking at marine renewable energy. And it's definitely not because it's a low cost, easy resource to develop, but it does have attributes that are important to Canada, that could be beneficial to Canada, and that is why, and globally, and that is why we're looking at it. So it's a clean energy solution that can address climate change. It's another renewable energy resource to provide, that has its own attributes in terms of predictability and reliability. And then it also has proximity to quite a few rural and remote communities. So there's more potential there that we need to look into. And then finally, the economic potential. And for this sector, that's really important because it's an emerging sector globally, and there's a lot of opportunity for Canada to take a leadership role and develop skills and expertise that can be exported to the global market. So first, one thing I will say is that throughout this my talk, nothing is exhaustive. And what I mean by that is that I know there's a lot of activity going on. Not all of it, I'm not going to try to touch on all of it today, but what I wanted to do with these first few points is just to provide a snapshot of where I see us right now. So right now, in terms of where we are, when I think of industry activity, when I look back at when I started in the sector, which was now over 10 years ago, none of this was happening. I mean, very early stages. And so although there's frustrations that things are moving slowly and we haven't hit the point of commercialization yet, I do feel that we have achieved a lot. And that's why I'm really optimistic about where we are going in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years. I think there's a lot of potential there. So just to kind of briefly touch on a few of these things. In terms of wave energy, we've seen a lot of activity on the West Coast with University of Victoria really spearheading that. We also have technology developers like AOE that are working to think of novel ways to use their technology, and one focus is on powering aquaculture sites. And then on the East Coast, we also have the Wave Environment Research Center out of College of North Atlantic, looking at some similar things with powering aquaculture or desalination and other activities with wave energy. River current energy, there's huge potential throughout the country. Again, an untapped resource. We have some technology developers looking at that. ORPC in Quebec is looking at feasibility studies there. And then I would say the University of Manitoba through CHTTC has really been spearheading a lot of the work to understand how river current energy can support diesel displacement in remote communities. And then when we come to offshore wind energy, as all of you know, we don't have offshore wind being developed in Canada yet, but it is a major opportunity, particularly when you look at what's happening in the global market and the fact that it's really increasing in terms of development, and also just the market itself, just the dollar potential is increasing quite a bit. And so we have a number of developers and industry looking at that. And what the potential could actually be in Canada for development. There is a great resource. The challenge we have right now is that there's really not an electricity market for projects of that size. And there's obviously, a number of different kinds of barriers that would have to be addressed as well. And we are definitely in the early stages, but nothing I think that is, unachievable if we put our minds to it and really focus on, what the potential could be. Then on the radar screen, you'll see with tidal energy, there's quite a bit of activity. I'm not going to go through all the projects, but what I wanted to point out is that most of those are in Nova Scotia, and a lot of that has to do with supportive policies that have been put in place, investment. All the projects that you see there in Nova Scotia are the ones that have been permitted. They have awards, they have PPAs, and that essentially means they're on their path to moving ahead towards deployments and development. So that's an area where we have a lot of potential to learn, to innovate, and develop new technology and enabling technologies that could support export potential, but also growth of the industry. Aside from Nova Scotia, there is activity in other parts of the country. So I just wanted to point out that Yorebrook Tidal Energy in BC is developing a project in Haida Gwaii, and they've done some prototype testing and have aspirations to move ahead with a bit of a larger project. And then of course at FORCE and also SOAR, which is Sustainable Ocean Applied Research, there's ongoing activity to support the industry. So again, where we are, and this is again just a snapshot of currently right now, so not all of the things that have happened to date, just what we have in place at the moment. And I just wanted to touch on the fact that the government of Canada has done a number of things that would support this industry in moving ahead, and already has. So most recently, there has been a framework for offshore renewables established under the Canadian Energy Regulator Act. They've just started moving forward with a public consultation on regulations for that. And that will be really important to offshore wind, for example, if we were to move forward, because right now there is not a clear pathway or regulatory predictability. There's also, if you've been following, a number of investments or funding announcements that have recently been made that will support both tidal and river current energy. Those will be important to building the sector as we move forward. And there's been a lot of past investment that's also been provided by a number of different, or funding provided by a number of different departments federally as well. And I thought I would just point out that both, I would say, I mean, Nova Scotia is where we're seeing really, quite a bit of activity. And I mentioned that there's supportive policies and strategies in place, programs to help with permitting and demonstrations. And then British Columbia is where at least in our membership, there has been a lot of interest and activity, especially, I would say, 10 years ago, or maybe even a little more. We haven't seen the same kind of focused policies, but there are definitely pieces in place that could support development moving forward. I think the other important thing in terms of where we are, and that's really great when you think about strategic research and what's needed, is that there are research organizations and academic institutions engaged across Canada that are building expertise, that are informing innovation in the sector, that are supporting the need to address critical challenges and are finding answers and solutions. The ones that I've kind of put on here, I think is probably just a handful of them. There are others I know that are involved, but all of this has been really important to addressing key issues and challenges. And also some of them have also been involved in establishing and supporting enabling infrastructure and technologies that have been developed to support the sector. The other point that I just wanted to point out is that, or the other piece, is that there's also a growing, like since the sector started over a decade ago or became a focus, we have seen a huge increase in the number of ocean-focused organizations. And so some are focused on innovation, research, some are focused on commercialization, but those are also organizations that I think can support the sector as it grows and moves forward. And then this is just a snapshot I really just kind of wanted to make the point in terms of where we are, of how far the supply chain has also come with the sector as well, and where they are. There's definitely companies now that are experienced, that are gaining even more experience and expertise. This is about 100 companies. This is just representative of Marine Renewables Canada's membership, but there are probably 300 more, I would say, just in the region in Atlantic Canada that could be added to this list. And they're developing, they've been supporting projects here, but they've also been, some of them have been providing services to international markets as well. So I would say where we are right now, we're in a good place to grow the sector. We have a solid foundation in a number of areas. And what I'm going to talk about now is, what kind of my vision is in terms of, or what I would say Marine Renewables Canada's vision is in moving and where the sector could go in the next 10 years and what could be accomplished. And I've tried to kind of think big picture here, but also practically in terms of where we are and what could be achieved. And I didn't get into the weeds on exactly how we do all that because I figure that will come out in some of the discussions after this. One thing I would say, I wanted to kick it off with this, is just in terms of vision for the sector. I think we need to look at it in two ways, and sometimes we look at it as just having clean electricity potential. Other times we look at it as ocean tech and part of the blue economy. But I think we really need to be looking at it as both. So when I think 10 years out, I think what I would like to see is that marine renewable energy is providing a clean energy solution for increased electrification and also contributing to Canada's blue economy, and that the two go hand in hand. So these are some of my thoughts here on what we could accomplish. And it's definitely not exhaustive at all, but this is just to give you some food for thought and things to think about when you move into your discussion. And this is also what we would really like to see how the sector progresses. And the first is just, given that there is this hub of already growing activity in Nova Scotia, it's going to be important that we see that those projects are successful. And so 10 years from now, I think we would all like to see that there's a growing hub of activity in Nova Scotia that focuses on both large and small scale projects, because we're already seeing that there's the beginnings of that, or there has been the beginnings of that for a while. And what that would look like would be the permitted projects that I mentioned at the beginning, that they've been successful, which would lead to about 30 megawatts or more of deployed technology, and that there's additional opportunities being pursued. Obviously, a lot of that has to do with whether costs come down for electricity, but this is how we will also see costs come down, is by building the volume and scale. And in part of doing that, we'll see increased opportunities for involvement of suppliers, Indigenous communities, rural communities, and also the development of new technology and expertise that can be exported to support national and international markets. So there's a lot of different things that we'll need to go into doing, moving the sector to that point with tidal energy in Nova Scotia, particularly working in harsh environments. I just wanted to make 2 points, and I think in terms of getting there, the first is that we still need to see risk reduction to accelerate deployment. And for an example of that is around environmental effects, regulatory processes, and just learning more to be able to inform those. And we're already seeing collaboration amongst industry and government and researchers on that area. We've seen that for a while, and that continues to happen. So that's very positive. And there's probably other industry pain points that can also be collectively looked at that would help with risk reduction, but also cost reduction at the same time. One thing that I've always wanted to see, and it's not as prevalent, I would say, in Canada, but that there's more of an overarching strategic approach amongst government and industry to address some of the priority actions and challenges that are needed to be addressed to move things forward. And so an example of that, some of you might be familiar with some of these, and obviously the grass is greener depending on where you are. And so I can't say I know the ins and outs. But one example that I've been looking at is in Europe with ETIP Ocean. And so it's a collective effort amongst industry and government to identify priority research areas and ensure that funding goes to those. And I think that's also a way that we can see where that funding is the potential of the funding is maximized, and that it's really addressing some of the priority areas. The second opportunity that I think has a lot of potential and a lot of potential to explore over the next 5-10 years is marine renewable energy powering communities, but also other blue economy markets. So some of you might be familiar with some of the work that Ocean Energy Systems most recently has done, but also US Department of Energy has focused on how marine renewables can power not just electricity to the grid, or not just provide electricity to the grid, but other markets such as aquaculture or underwater vehicle charging, ocean observation, offshore oil and gas. We're seeing a lot of that with offshore wind. And I think there's that's an untapped opportunity for Canada, and one that we could really capitalize and take advantage of, given that we are growing our ocean economy here, and there's a lot of potential there. And then the other side of it is also that there's already a focus on marine renewables in remote communities, but I think more work could go towards really understanding how we tap into that opportunity and develop technologies, but also inform communities and help them learn how they could get involved and use marine renewables effectively, and allow for self-sufficiency of the community. And so a few things in just how we get there. I think facilitated collaboration with other ocean industries to identify opportunities and other blue economy markets will be important. The other thing is we have forests on the East Coast, but we don't really have a center or an initiative that just is focusing on supporting off-grid community projects to provide for obviously the testing maybe of technologies, but also the training and engagement and partnership building that could be helpful for communities that want to get involved in using marine renewable energy for a power resource. In that vein also, I think we should be looking at supporting coastal and remote and Indigenous communities to engage in community energy planning and technology assessment, and some of that is already underway, but I think that will need to continue to reach a point where marine renewable energy is more prevalent in remote communities. And then with some of the resources, I would say, especially when we think of river current energy, more data collection and resource assessment is necessary to identify communities with high marine renewable energy potential. And then the last one I wanted to touch on is offshore wind. And so if I think about 10 years from now, I think that it's reasonable to see ourselves as an emerging market for offshore wind, but a lot of pieces have to fall into place to get to that point. And there's two different ways to look at it. So a few things is at first, what that looks like, or the way I would see it is that the existing offshore oil and gas or other ocean industry expertise and services or service sector there are applied to offshore wind development internationally, which we're already doing work in, but also the beginnings of domestic development or exploration. There's also needs to be a broader understanding of the benefits and business case for offshore wind in Canada, and we would also see the beginning of domestic offshore wind development underway. So how do we get there? First, I think a lot of work at such early stages with offshore wind that there needs to be a lot of work done with studies and research and engagement overall to support investment and decision making. So a few ideas and thoughts on that is, we have to look at identification of ideal sites, really at the early stages of this. But what's really important is analysis of the benefits of offshore wind versus other renewables, how it contributes to goals and overarching policies, and the value of industrial development, because obviously these are larger projects. And the other side of it is also creating opportunities to mobilize and ramp up local supply chain. That will be really important to both domestic and international opportunities for offshore wind development. So things like training, maybe even the demonstration or pilot projects of different types of offshore wind technologies where supply chain can engage and gain experience. And then continuing to look at international market opportunities too, where Canadian SMEs and suppliers can gain more experience and have the opportunity to innovate and provide solutions. So that kind of wraps up what I had prepared for everybody. And I'm sure, I know that I didn't cover everything, but I hope it did provide some food for thought and kind of get you thinking about some of the things that we can look forward to or work on together. So thank you all. And if there were any questions, I'm happy to answer those. But I'll also probably be jumping back and forth between some of the breakout rooms as well. So thank you.